This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, an online learning community. Do you ever worry if you're doing research and prospect management correctly? At the Institute, we turn researchers into fundraising intelligence assets, leading your development officers to the biggest and best donor prospects, and bringing your organization major gift success.
And one of the biggest shifts generative AI has introduced in our industry, I think, is that information is no longer the scarce resource. Judgment is now the scarce resource. We can generate lists and summaries and signals faster than ever, but that doesn't automatically make our decisions better.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Vered Siegel, CFRE, Director of Prospect Management and Research at American Friends of the Hebrew University. Hello, Vered. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before we jump into the bigger fundraising ops conversation, would you be willing to share a bit about your career? Things like how you got started, where you're now, what brings you joy?
Sure. I guess I'll start by saying I'm currently the Director of Prospect Management and Research at American Friends of the Hebrew University, which is my first foray back into the sector after a decade as a consultant. I've spent nearly 20 years in advancement services and fundraising operations. I've been very fortunate to hold almost every role in a fundraising office. I started as a development assistant at a homeless shelter, and I worked in-house at mostly social services nonprofits for the first part of my career. Then I transitioned to working for a vendor, Blackbaud, as a senior consultant and a program manager for Razor's Edge NXT and their data intelligence suite of products. I led large-scale implementations and audits and cleanup projects and hosted webinars that reached thousands of people. It was a good run. That experience gave me a really unique perspective into the shared challenges that institutions face, but also for how products and market forces and people have to work together for better or for worse. After my stint at Blackbaud, I spent 2 years with CCS Fundraising, where I led enterprise-level fundraising systems strategy. My work there kind of sat at the intersection of technology and operations and institutional goals. I helped organizations modernize how they supported fundraising at scale. In terms of educational background, which might be interesting to some people, I hold a BA in philosophy from the University of Illinois. I have a master's degree in nonprofit management from Spartus College with a focus on fundraising operations. And I've maintained my CFRE since 2011, which is something I'm really proud of. But I think in terms of, you asked, what brings you joy in your work? And I think I want to highlight my extracurricular. I've been deeply involved with the Association of Advancement Services Professionals, the AASP, for most of my career, serving on conference faculty for over 15 years, founding the scholarship program for underrepresented groups. I previously chaired the Advancement Technology Best Practices Committee, and I currently chair the DEI Ethics and Compliance Committee.
Wow, that is wild. I love how that brings you joy.
Yeah. It's been the number one extracurricular in my life and my work for 2 decades now.
And I did read the DEI best practices. I think my favorite part of it, though, was when you talk about the why, like there's this whole section on the purpose, and that really gets me going. That got me excited. And the rest of it is that framework for now applying. It was really helpful. And those documents, I know, don't appeal to, say, fundraisers perhaps, but when you have to deal with all the systems and everything, you guys really covered all the bases with that. That's so exciting. I'll be sure to put a link for folks if they're interested in accessing that, how they can do it, because that is just so important. Well, I'm glad all of those things bring you joy, because I would like to talk to you about advancement operations. Things are in flux these days in so many ways, as they always are. I just feel like the pace keeps getting more rapid, as it has forever. We're just, with AI, we're really being pushed hard, and it's difficult for us to reflect and figure it out for real. Now, you talk about yourself as an advancement services practitioner, especially for those who are outside of higher education. Advancement is kind of a strange word when you first hear it. What does it mean to be an advancement services practitioner?
Yeah. So advancement services is the part of fundraising that designs and manages the systems that make relationship based fundraising possible at scale. So that includes prospect research and management, but also data and reporting, CRM systems, gift and bio processing, compliance, analytics, and increasingly governance. I know your listeners are in the field of prospect research. So the best way to explain it is to say that advancement services is the broader ecosystem that many of you already work within, even if you don't use the label.
That's a great explanation. I like the at scale. It's
Yep.
critical.
The at scale part is important to note because the industry itself conceptually is at scale. So even if your organization is small, you have a compatriot at other organizations that is doing the work that you're doing. And thus, we are all working at scale in a meaningful way.
It's true. The fundamentals of what's happening in advancement operations or advancement services is happening in every organization. You may be the database administrator that's entering the gifts and doing prospect research and helping your development director figure out who to talk to next. It's just different words and things become, there are more people doing specialized things. And now let's jump into really fun, dramatic changes in the world through the advancement of generative AI, which we've all been like stoned with. It feels like sometimes, especially when we think about major gift fundraising, research, and prospect management. I mean, we're at that generative AI summaries of things. I haven't seen it so much with data analysis, but also building ratings and things like that. Now, there are plenty of people in the audience, I'm sure, and myself. We started working before prospect management was like a thing, let alone having software that does most of the hunting and gathering of information for us, which many of our tools do now. Research and prospect management, as I see it, is moving into that strategic partner role. So if somebody else, the software is doing hunting and gathering, then we're helping be a partner to the major gift officer in how do I reach this person? What do I do next with this person? I have witnessed you being a strategic partner, showing up in the room with major gift officers. Would you share how you view that and what that experience is? Like, what is that? What does that mean specifically?
So I guess I just want to affirm what you said, that you're right, that things are changing. And one of the biggest shifts generative AI has introduced in our industry, I think, is that information is no longer the scarce resource. Judgment is now the scarce resource. We can generate lists and summaries and signals faster than ever, but that doesn't automatically make our decisions better. One key aspect of being a strategic partner right now means helping the room slow down just enough to ask the right questions. So, what decision are we trying to make? What assumptions are we making? And what are the risks of acting on this information that we have in front of us? I also think it's really important to highlight that being a strategic partner also means setting boundaries. AI can surface patterns, but it doesn't understand institutional values or donor intent or ethical constraints. A strategic partner helps leadership understand where AI adds value and where it can sneakily introduce risk or bias or false confidence. So for me, in the now, strategic partnership is definitely not about having the loudest voice in the room. It is about being the person you can count on to connect data and context and consequences and help that team make choices that they'll still stand behind a year from now or a lifetime from now.
Wow. I am so glad I invited you to talk with me about this today. Judgment. Yes, you are so right. And one of the struggles I've had with AI doing summaries of meetings is that it misses all the stuff of reading the room. Like it doesn't understand that it was important the way someone said something or even some of the word choices. Thank you. However, leading meetings, making suggestions, just being shoulder to shoulder with successful major gift officers and leaders, that can be really intimidating. I'm curious because I've watched you do it with confidence and poise, and confidence in the sense that you are able to stop worrying about what you're saying or how you look and think in the moment, in the meeting. How did you get the skills to do that? Did somebody teach you? Like how did it come about?
I will be the first person to tell you that I didn't start with confidence, but I definitely started with a strong sense of responsibility, perhaps an overly strong sense of responsibility. When you're working with data and systems, and now with AI generated insights, you very quickly realize that someone has to be accountable for how those tools are used and interpreted. Nature abhors a vacuum, but also I personally abhor a vacuum. And my guess is that this resonates with you too. So in the end, I would say, confidence is the byproduct of taking responsibility seriously over time. As AI and analytics become more common, that sense of responsibility has grown in me, but it's also become meaningfully more fragile because I've noticed that a lot of the decision points that used to be made by humans are now being delegated to machines and models, which inherently cannot be responsible. You can use technology tools to gather data, and you can use technology tools to organize that data into information, but only human judgment can transform that information into knowledge. Skip that final transformation at your own peril.
It's true. I feel many ways about AI's inability to be human, which is good. In a sense, it's nice to be human and not cloned. And when I think about data, I have a foundations in fundraising analytics course at the Institute, and it's very basic, just to make sure everyone has a good grounding in how you create, how you ask the good questions, being methodical about your approach, and then making sure you answer the question like, are you giving leadership or whoever asked the information they need to be successful in their quest? The whole purpose of this. And one of the things I discover with folks, especially those that are smarter or just faster at learning or already have some experience of manipulating in Excel, is that they move too quickly and they make mistakes. And I find those mistakes not because I have an answer key, but because I look at it and I'm like, that makes no sense. You know, I don't care if it's right or wrong, right? Like I'm looking at it and saying, if I'm a person trying to make a decision based on this data, I'm seeing that this couldn't be right. And I'm recognizing that the person who created it, especially when they know something already, like when they are already good at it, they went too fast. Like they did not check their work. They didn't stop and say, wait a minute. Okay, now what? What would I recommend based on that? And then, in that sense, if you view your AI the same way, you have to manage that output. You can't just be Deloitte and get paid, I don't know how many millions for a report that has hallucinated sources. Like we need to, as you said, be responsible for the output. We have to look it over and be critical. Would that agree with how you were thinking about it?
Absolutely. I think a lot about the framework of that data to knowledge to information pipeline. I think a lot about the data to information to knowledge pipeline and the necessity of those two transition points in between. That we can gather data from any number of sources, and it might be correct and it might not be correct. And so we require at least some vetting at that level. And then to transition from data to information requires us to organize it. So the first transformation is an organizational transformation. And if the data is correct, you'll have good information if you've applied the right organizing principles to it. And if it's not, Lord help us all. But then that second transformation piece to turn the information into knowledge necessarily requires human judgment, experience. And sometimes folks will simply convey the information as if it were knowledge. But really good advancement services practitioners, really good prospect researchers insert themselves in that second transformation. They help fundraisers know what to apply to the information to turn it into knowledge.
This is another struggle I've witnessed in some research shops where the head of development is unhappy with the work, unhappy with the capacity ratings, whatever it is, and that communication begins to break down when the researcher doesn't realize that it's their job now, right? It wasn't always, But now the expectation is that we will add strategy, that we will take the information we find and have verified, and we will craft an insight or an action that can be taken. We'll say these three pieces of information are meaningful because of this, and therefore you can do that. That is also a workshop we're going to do this year because this has just come around, I feel like, so fast that people who weren't paying attention, suddenly they're getting bad reviews. It feels so unfair. But I love the way you break that down. I don't think we operate or often get that framework. Have you already written some of this stuff down? Is this part of your work at AASP or anything like that?
Not presently, although you've certainly planted the seed that I should probably think about putting out a white paper on this.
I would love to see that and share it. You can see a case study, but if you don't understand the framework behind the case study, then what do I do when I go back to my office? I'm not sure. And again, it's intimidating to be in a room of confident, gregarious, sometimes even aggressive folks or type A personalities. So we can use all the help we can get. So, along those lines, at the Prospect Research Institute, we use the what, so what, therefore approach to teach researchers how to craft strategies in their profiles. And I discovered, Vered, that that was developed by Terry Borton in 1970, which is a long time ago. It still feels pretty relevant. I'm wondering if you have like thoughts on that, additional resources for developing strategy or working side by side with major gift officers on prospect strategy for people to use.
So the what, so what, therefore is a strong framework because it helps people move from information to action, which is what fundraisers and leadership demand from us. Where I think teams need additional support right now is in how they relate to the tools producing the data and the information, especially when it comes from AI. So I think I want to start with an approach that I take, and then I have some thoughts about resources. I encourage everyone to start intentionally dehumanizing AI tools. These systems don't have judgment or values or epistemic humility, no matter how good your prompts are. They don't know what they don't know. They can't take responsibility for the consequences of a recommendation. When we treat AI outputs as authoritative or intuitive, which is maybe even more dangerous, we're assigning human qualities to systems that don't possess them. But the flip side of that is that market forces, including AI, have also been dehumanizing fundraisers. Fundraisers are being asked to move faster, to trust data summaries they don't understand, to override their own professional judgment sometimes. And those conditions create moral injury that separates the fundraiser from their vocation. Fundraisers are held accountable for decisions that are increasingly shaped by tools they don't control and can't interrogate. No wonder there is a fundraiser burnout problem. So I feel really strongly about restoring human centered boundaries in our work and increasingly recentering and empowering fundraisers as moral actors in their own lives. Be the captain of your own ship, fundraisers. I will be in the engine room. In terms of resources, I'd encourage any prospect researchers listening who aren't already tapped into the AASP to check out that organization as a resource. The knowledge base and best practices include, but don't center prospect research. That's APRA's domain, and APRA does it amazingly well. I think the wider lens is increasingly valuable as our roles get fuzzier around the edges and we flex or are asked to flex into work that's adjacent to our specialty area. From a people perspective, I think I also want to challenge listeners to pursue having their own personal board of directors. So I have many folks that I consider mentors for varying things, but I don't always go to one person for everything. You go to who has the advisement that you need at the time. And so I want to encourage everybody to think about everyone you pick up the phone and call for advice and think about them sitting around a table as your own personal board of directors and tapping into folks in that mindset. That's been an incredible change of view for me. And I am very grateful to my own personal board of directors for everything that they have done for me over the course of my career. I'm also going to throw out kind of a throwback resource books. If you're even a little bit academically minded, go back to some of the roots of these existential vocational questions and pick up some moral philosophy. The books on my shelf right now that are getting the most repeat attention these days are What Money Can't Buy by Michael Sandel, Moralizing Technology by Peter Paul Verbeek, and The Ethics of Ambiguity by Simone de Beauvoir. Three absolutely seminal works. They are completely dog-eared on my shelf.
That is great. I think we know where you developed your poise and confidence. It helps to be prepared, doesn't it?
Yes. I think that that is well in line with a long-term commitment to being responsible, because I think being prepared is an element of being responsible. It's not everything, but it is a necessary condition.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I will definitely make sure the resources are in the show notes and on the website so that people can find them. It was great talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
That was Vered Siegel, CFRE, Director of Prospect Management and Research at American Friends of the Hebrew University. I hope you were impressed with how much thought she puts into her work. I always admire someone who can see the framework behind an activity or project, and Vered nailed it on the role of fundraising research to be responsible at each juncture of our work, from gathering the data, turning it into information, and moving it to the realm of knowledge, judgment, or action. You definitely want to connect and follow Vered to find out what she comes up with next. Hey there! Do you manage a prospect research team, or were you newly hired as a prospect researcher? Then you'll be delighted to hear about the Institute's Career Agent Track. In this bundle of 4 courses, participants learn how to build great profiles, calculate capacity ratings, the basics of prospect identification and prospect management, ethics, and the fundamentals of analytics every team member needs to be skilled in. If you need to build the research skills of a fundraising intelligence asset like this, sign up today at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org/career agent.